Okay, so this is the September 19th, 2018 SIG Auth meeting. Looks like we have a light agenda today. The first item on the agenda is the V113 development timeline. Who added that?
I did. I just wanted to put out a general reminder to everyone that this is our shortest release segment of the year. So plan on having less time to develop features that you want to get in 113. And if you are working on a design for a new feature, the designs should really be in the review stage at this point, I would say. Anything that hasn't really entered the review stage yet is going to be at risk for making the 113 cutoff. And you can find, I'll post a link to the SIG releases, which has the more details on the actual dates around 113.
Yeah. Generally, KubeCon, North America, and holidays cut pretty deeply into our actual amount of work time this quarter. All right, thanks for the heads up, Tim. All right, the next item that I wanted to discuss, I'm not sure if anybody was interested in this. It is potentially extending image pull credentials to support a flow based on the service account tokens. So now that we have service account tokens that can be more tightly scoped to usage, I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that we can start using them as a replacement for image pull secrets in environments that can support such a token flow. I think Clayton had mentioned this a while ago in a maybe a container identity working group. The idea is, if you're unfamiliar, the image pull secrets right now, how they work is you can attach an image pull secret to a service account. And when a kubelet tries to run a pod as a specific service account, as it pulls the image for that pod, it will submit the image pull secret as the registry token for to the CRI, and the CRI will use that to authenticate to the Docker registry. So this allows per tenant isolation or segmentation of image access. So you could think about a team. Team A can pull images that they own, but not images for Team B. That's the general idea of that current mechanism. So the proposal in this issue that I'll draw up into a KEP or something is that instead of using an image pull secret, we use a service account token, or with a potential exchange with a token exchange with an auth server. And then use either the service account token or the OAuth token to authenticate to the Docker registry instead of the image pull secret. And this solves a couple of problems. People don't have to maintain secrets for their that have credentials to their Docker registry, and that makes rotation easier. The it improves security because you're not relying on the secrets mechanism, which is considered somewhat insecure right now. And you would get it automatically. It would be much simpler. Once set up, it would be much simpler for cluster users to use this mechanism. So that's the motivation. I'm going to draw this up, and if it's not controversial, try to move forward with it. Does anybody have any comments on that?
How does the token work with like existing container registries? Am I missing something? Like how would you be able to leverage a security account token to authenticate to like GitHub or Quay? Am I missing something there?
Yeah. So it depends. There is a grant type called token exchange. That's an OAuth grant type. So you could conceive of an OAuth authorization server that implements a token endpoint, being able to validate this token and validate the service account token and return a token for use against the registry. Pending support from Quay or Docker IO, I think that there's potentially a spot for a open source project to implement that exchange, where an operator stands up a server as the exchange server and implements that OAuth flow. Otherwise, I think in the long term, more support for the token exchange grant type would be useful across OAuth providers. How does someone authenticate to Docker IO today? Can they use a Google identity, or does Docker IO have its own identity space?
I believe it's the same mechanism that like Quay and stuff uses, which is basically a Docker config that you populate, much the way that we do it today with like image pull registry secrets. But
is it password-based?
It's not a straight password. It doesn't have to be a straight password. It could be a token that's associated with your account that you log in and retrieve. Mm-hmm. But my concern is that like I don't know how that would map to. I don't know how to get from there to service account tokens,
right,
without exposing something like an API server in a way that, you know what I mean, like doesn't quite follow it easily.
Yeah. So I think the problem with those static files is that the secrets never get rotated, and the other problem is the Docker daemon in this situation is multi-tenant.
Totally get the security problem. I agree that the secrets have to be rotated. Maybe there's a way to create, model a way to provide more pressure to do that, right? Like when you populate a secret or a token that is known to be, is known that where it is known that it will become stale, that you somehow set up some sort of that we report on the age of that secret as an error level thing, like whether that's a metrics level thing, you know what I mean? Like understand how to expose secrets that we house in a stale way as they age. And so if there's a secret that's known to be stale for more than like 2 weeks or something, then, raise it like as a concern. And if it's known to be stale for like a month, then, make it an error thing. And then it's on the operator to actually, make use of that from the metrics perspective. But that might be useful.
I think the key point is we need to figure out how these integrate with how this feature would integrate with existing Docker registries in a way that improves security. I'll take a note to explore that. I think that it's possible that eventually they catch up, but I think that there's some things that we can do in the short term that that'll close the gap as stopgap fixes.
So I'm trying to reason about how this would work in similar to like what OpenShift does today, because and it's been a long time since I looked this in OpenShift, but if I recall correctly, we like basically do what like the kubelet does with image secrets. We just do a token review and then SAR our way to victory. I'm trying to figure out how this would fit in, and I'm not exactly sure where the OAuth flow comes in.
So I think that that flow is a very good flow as the default case. And I would definitely want to support that. And I think this is basically inspired by that because Clayton was the one who made this feature request. The idea of the token exchange is that if you think of a registry like Docker that has support for Google OIDC, the Google OIDC provider, but does not have support for validating arbitrary tokens from arbitrary issuers. The token exchange is a mechanism for providing the kubelet with a token that can be used against the Docker registry. Ideally, I would say that I would be very happy if everybody supported validation of Kubernetes service account tokens, but I don't think that's realistic. So the optional token exchange as part of that flow is meant to help provide a path to bridging the integrators.
So if I understand it correctly, if you were someone who was Kubernetes aware and you were building a registry, certainly today you could use token review, subject access review, and everything to very carefully build, audit, and support rotation and so forth for tokens. If you are not that person, but you are a normal registry that supports OIDC and perhaps some forms of claims support within those tokens, because Kubernetes service account tokens are kind of close enough to that, you could probably have the same flow, but in a more generic and kube agnostic way.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Okay.
It brings the supported registries from registries that understand Kubernetes tokens to registries that understand bearer tokens. So it's a larger set of registries. I think it's almost all registries at that point. It will require somebody to write code to implement the exchange how they would like to implement it, but it does close that gap. That's the idea. I think that for self-hosted registries, like what OpenShift does, I don't believe that a token exchange provides value.
I'll say that in the field, working with customers trying to resolve issues around the image pull secrets, frequently we are in a state where like we have to figure out how to create that Docker config file so that locally, so that we can determine like whether just straight up Docker can pull an image. And then once we have that all figured out, we then put that up as a secret associated with the service account so that we know how to do that. So like whatever semantic we end up using here, as long as it continues to support that basic model, that would be super helpful.
I think that we will not end support for image pull secrets, but I think that can be much easier, or just a no-brainer for registries that have support for this. And that's my goal.
So a question I had is, who is validating audience in this flow?
So there are two flows that we could separate. The OpenShift one, where you directly send the token to the registry. In that case, the registry would be responsible for validating the audience. And I would expect that when you set up the registry. I don't think probably the OpenShift registry is audience aware yet, because that's kind of a brand new Kubernetes feature. But I would expect that you start up the registry with a command line flag that represents the audience, and it just string compares those fields with the field in the JOT. In the token exchange flow, both the registry and the token endpoint are responsible for validating tokens. And similarly, you start them up with the identifier that they should identify as. But the token returned from an OAuth token exchange endpoint could be an opaque access token as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a ODC ID token that is introspectable. And it could just be GitHub style API key or a non-OAuth token, or I guess not a non-OAuth token. It has to be a bare token, but it could be where a token where the resource owner is the authenticator and authorizer for the specific resource space, if that makes sense. So I think it's pretty flexible.
Does the presence of the audience, like in the proposed issue, does that mean, like, are you saying that the token with that audience can pull any image from that registry? Is that what that sort of mean?
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe. So if a token with an audience of the registry is intended for use as credentials to authorize an image pull. The subject of the token, the authorized principal, might be authorized to pull some images, but not authorized to pull other images. So you make an authorization decision based on the subject. You decide, you bind the token to the usage as an image pull credential using the audience.
Okay, I understand. So, but you are effectively using that token as both like the authentication and authorization of pulling images from a registry, possibly some subset of images.
I think mostly just the authentication. Authorization is delegated to the registry. The registry makes its own authorization decision based on the identity of the image pull request.
Okay.
Cool. Since there's seems to be that there's no strong objection. So I'll write this up and we can discuss over proposals. Thanks for the feedback. I'll take notes on what was discussed today and explore it further. I guess we're at halftime, so let's move on to the next item. So bug bounty scope poll. Maya, did you want to talk about this?
Sure. I think some of you might have seen a pull request that Tim Alclair submitted in the last couple of days. We're just looking at potentially having a bug bounty for Kubernetes, and there's a proposed initial scope in that pull request. So if you haven't taken a look at that yet, please do take a look. I don't know, Tim, if you want to just spend some time discussing that right now.
Yeah, sure. Should we, do you want to run through what we have so far, or were you just hoping to draw attention to the pull request?
A little bit of both. I mean, I guess it depends. If people haven't seen it yet, it might be a bit hard to react right now. I'll just pull it up. That's what I said. We have a block there.
Mm-hmm. I'm not religious about this.
Should I present? Would that be
helpful? Yeah, sure.
You see my screen?
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yeah. If you hit view in the top right, it'll be a little easier to read.
Who are the other TLs involved?
Thank you. So there's a proposed scope in here. As I was just kind of saying, this is not yet active. This is something we're thinking about doing. We'd like to get done in the next couple of months. So we'd like community feedback as to what this makes sense and what the scope should be and all that kind of stuff. Again, right now, if you're listening to this video and recording and you have a bug bounty, please, if you have a bug, please go report it to the appropriate channel and go from there. So some of the attacks that we were considering here in scope would be cluster level attacks. So,
Maya, sorry to interrupt. Just before we jump into the specifics, I just wanted to give a kind of idea of the angle that we're approaching this from. Originally, we were trying to come up with a very specific setup that could be used for security research on Kubernetes, and look at like a specific configuration that researchers could use and bring up a cluster and then try different attacks against. We ultimately decided that Kubernetes is just such a big project with so many different like valid configuration setups that it was going to be really difficult to do that. And so kind of where we landed was just trying to enumerate pieces that we consider in scope and then explicitly list things that we consider out of scope for the program as well. And there's certainly a lot that's missing from this document, and there's a lot of gray area between what's in scope and out of scope that's not covered. And the hope is that as we start receiving reports and as folks start to kind of like look at bugs and kind of see how it fits into this document, that we can kind of grow the document and sort of narrow it to cover those specific use cases. So definitely viewing this as kind of like a living document and expecting to sort of crowdsource a lot of the detail on the scope. Yeah, so with that, maybe we can run through sort of the starting point that we've laid out here.
Sounds good. So what we're proposing are cluster attacks being in scope. So anything that would allow remote code execution, unauthorized access to CD, path traversals, auth bugs, any kind of privilege escalation would be in scope. Supply chain attacks around submitting code to repos that should not be there, unauthorized artifacts, modification of any kind of GitHub data, or any credentials that are found in code. And in terms of components that would be in scope, would be anything in the last 3 minor releases that's considered a stable and supported version that is in tree. And in tree volume plugins. Before I go into out of scope, anything here that's surprising, obviously please do make changes or comments directly on the PR. Okay, I'm moving down to what's out of scope, what's being proposed as being out of scope. And this is more around a little bit of what Tim was mentioning, things that aren't necessarily as well reviewed right now, and we know there might be some issues here, or might be very specific to the user's configuration. So some of these include alpha features, which are not yet part of a stable release, container escalations and escapes to the host, which are not specific to Kubernetes. Same thing with Linux privilege escalations. Any attacks from the host that the containers are running on, or relying on deprecated components, and vulnerabilities in a specific setup or vulnerabilities in components that Kubernetes depends on, such as etcd. Just pause there again. Any feedback on what's documented here? Things you would have expected to see, things that you're surprised to see. All right, so in that case, I'd say please do take a look at the PR. If you have any feedback, add some comments there. Again, the hope is to move this forward the next couple of weeks and months. And once we have a scope, we'll start discussing what a bug bounty program would actually look like, and that will be formally announced once it's available.
Did we ever decide that the product security team was taking the lead on the bug bounty, and we are SIG Auth is an informed party, or are we driving the bug bounty through SIG Auth?
Yeah, I think we decided that the ownership of the bug bounty would be handled through the product security team. But SIG Auth is probably the most significant contributor to kind of providing feedback,
right,
and interacting with that. But yeah, I would also expect to, or I would also hope to get feedback from SIG-Node and SIG networking and other SIGs that might have feedback for that.
If I can propose, I propose that since product security would be the team responding to most of these, they probably have the most say into kind of what the scope should be. SIG Auth, again, is what you're saying, Mike, as a reviewer. But we would need SIG Auth support to take this to all the other SIGs and the rest of the community and get buy-in. In terms of actually funding a bug bounty and all of that, I'm happy to work with the CNCF to figure that out. That's something that we've discussed.
One other thing to mention on that, we are in the process of working on laying out a bit more about the governance of the product security team, and possibly opening up some new roles within that team that are more handling more of the kind of public security issues, and the bug bounty would definitely fall under that area as well. So if you're interested in getting involved with that some more, stay tuned.
Cool. Thank you for presenting that, Maya and Tim. If there are no more questions, I think that was the last item. I threw a second announcement on, which is just a link to the sub-projects PR. If you haven't seen it and you would like to weigh in, please take a look. This is defining sub-projects of for SIG Auth and code ownership for our SIG. Yeah, so please comment if you feel like anything is missing. I'll try to get that in the next week or two. I think that's our entire agenda. Unless anybody has anything else to add, we can conclude the meeting for today. Keep it short. All right, final call. Thanks, everyone. See you in 2 weeks.
Thanks.